Mm. I wonder if I'm still reversed. I can't even tell. Okay. Hey guys, hope you're having a good week. This is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio. Our main show is Sunday night, but this is the relatively newer show called Lost Arts Radio Live, where we look at some of the news events from the previous week up through today when we're broadcasting, because it is live, and what their implications are for our lives in general. And I know the title of this week's show, if we got it posted, this cheerful title, America's Existence in Peril from Three Major Threats. I got a whole bunch of notes down here, so I hope you don't mind if I look down once in a while. Just don't want to remember. Don't worry, you won't remember anything. Don't want to forget anything. So that was the title, Three Major Threats that are putting America's future in doubt in fairly serious ways. And I know if a lot of you are listening from other countries, then you might wonder, well, why do we mostly talk about events in America or in the U.S.? And well, mainly it's because that's where we are, but it's relevant to the whole world, which is completely tied together. And the same issues threatening the survival of the U.S. as a country that's supposed to be based on freedom anyway, is relevant to every other country on the planet in various ways. So I don't feel like we're talking only about issues that affect America at all. And love to hear from any of you that want to talk about issues in your own country. We can certainly bring that in because it's all relevant. In Europe, for example, all the stuff happening with the Yellow Vest protests and in France, at least, the suggested government response will just criminalize protests. It should make it nice and peaceful again, because as Paul Watson pointed out, this normal system then will be you have to have government permission to protest the government. And I mean, you have to get used to insanity because that's what's going on all over. And really the three issues that we're going to talk about here as quickly as possible, because I've got probably 10 times as much as we need to talk about that I want to bring up. And in reality, the three issues are one issue, and that's lack of consciousness. It's not a new agey or, just philosophical type thing at all. It's really true that if humans are displaying somewhat less consciousness right now than most other life forms, in my opinion, but they also have the potential to do some incredible things. And when they get more self-aware of what they can really do, the issue of suicide for your own country and destroying the rest of the world, or taking over the planet for your religion to make God happy and stuff like that, those never come up. Those are things that we're susceptible to when we become unconscious zombies. So really that's the issue. But it manifests in a lot of different ways. And the ones that we're going to talk about now in this few minutes that we have here were kind of brought up by Mike's article. And since this is a public platform many public platforms we're talking on right now, I have to watch my language because I think it's more better service to you guys if we don't get banned immediately, if I can help it. And most of the banning, especially on the smaller channels, is being done by automated bots, and short for robot, in case you never really understood what a bot is. It's like a robot, except it's mainly software type robot. So it may not have a physical shape, but you've got these algorithms, which are just programs searching for certain things, such as keywords. And when I say that Mike wrote this article, I have to separate it with a few words and say his last name is Adams. And he has a great site that you can get on for free and get on his newsletter, which has good articles every day. It's called Natural, and then the second word of it is news, also totally banned. But you can get it. Go to thatsite.com. And he wrote a great article this week. He's got multiple articles every week, sometimes once a day. And the premise of the article is simple. If Google, you heard of that search engine called Google, right? That like 95% of all the searches on computers or on phones in the world are done on Google. It's quite popular. And Mike's article says if they're not stopped in their program of censorship, controlling the search results and things like that, and the company broken up into small, more harmless pieces, then America is finished. Those are his literal words. So, we might look at that and see, well, most people might say, search results, why do those matter for the future of America or the world? That doesn't make any sense. But the tech giants, meaning the giant companies that control technology like Google, and the social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, and all the other major ones, and they're controlling access to information. And over the last quite a few years, they've been ramping up this program of using their algorithm programs to decide what search results you get. For example, when the term idiot was put into Google a couple of years ago, we tested it. A picture of the current president comes up as an example of an idiot, which he's not. But what that indicated was that Google was working with a certain part of the global ruling cartel to make sure that for some reason, and which will explain, that the current president would be equated with idiot. Now that affects hundreds of millions of people. And when you have that going on, you can't have real elections anymore. That's over. And whoever controls the search results controls the fate of the countries and the people in the world. So Mike's right. It's pretty serious. And it makes real news very hard to get. And we mentioned last week that there's this new service, in quotes, that's coming up called NewsGuard, that's going to start becoming default software in certain apps and on phones, Apple and Android and some other phones. And it's going to tell you what search results are reasonable for you to look for, what sites are reasonable to visit, what channels on YouTube you can look at. And if you try to look at one that's not approved by government and industry, then it's going to warn you and say this could really be bad for you if you go any further. And then they will report you to government agencies that will oversee that. And eventually, if they copy what's being done in China already under their tyranny, that is one of the worst in the world, it's planned for America and all the other countries too. They will not only block your searches or your attempt to visit a website, they'll lower your social score. And it's kind of like your credit score now, except it's going to be like a life score. So if it gets lower than a certain amount, you still have total freedom, except you can't get on an airplane or a train or get certain kinds of jobs or maybe access your bank account on certain days or things like that, just to help you become an upright citizen again. And if you associate with anybody with a low credit score, it lowers your credit score. That's what's coming. And that's what is being talked about by Mike's article, that sort of thing. And it started in America already in different forms. Anyway, it makes it almost impossible to get real news of anything in your country or in the world. and it definitely makes real elections impossible. So the reason that, well, one interesting thing that's coming out from the situation in America where they've happened to get a president from the last election that is not part of the ruling cartel. And so he's doing things that are unacceptable. And as a result, it's a really great opportunity to see the collusion between all the major media outlets, which are really the mouthpiece of a few major global corporations. They're all showing that you should hate the U.S. president because he's an idiot and a racist and a Nazi and a misogynist and a xenophobic and all these other phobic things. And none of it's true. I know because I checked. I did a lot of research on it. None of it's true. It was starting from the 2016 campaign where before he became president, in office or anything, he sent out a Christmas card a month before inauguration and had himself standing in front of a Christmas tree waving. And the same media that is all together attacking him now, often with the same words and sentences from teleprompters that come from the same central control points. They were saying, what kind of a egomaniac puts himself in front of a Christmas tree and actually waves to you? And they were really serious. That's been going on now. It doesn't matter what he does. He's doing some things now that the opposition was pushing before, but now because he's doing it, and the priority is to get rid of him because he's not part of the global rulers, they'll hate whatever he does. It doesn't matter. And we'll get into that a little more. I'm going to tell you the three issues that we're talking about in this quick few-minute broadcast here. And one of them you already know because I told you about Mike's article. It's censorship. And that if access to information is blocked or substituted with false information, that's the only thing you can get. It's very similar to the book burning that happened in Germany in World War II, but much more complete and much more efficient. I think that's one of the reasons for going to ebooks and Kindle and all this stuff now is because they're really easy to change the book without destroying it. But with respect to the tech giants and social media platforms and all that, it's basically much more advanced than book burning, and it controls what you perceive as the truth. And then you've got the media all in collusion on television and newspaper saying, yeah, this is true, and demonizing anybody who goes against it. In fact, I didn't mention this in my notes because I didn't think of it in time, but there's a representative in Iowa right now in the U.S. named Steve King, and he was defending the president, which you're not allowed to do, else the media will try to destroy you. And he said, well, wait a minute, he's not doing anything racist. Being supportive and proud of your own country so that you can be an example to all the others, that's not racist. And saying that Western civilization has done a lot of good things, that's not racist either, because every country can say there are elements in it that have done a lot of good things, and that's true. And he was saying this is not white supremacy or racism or something. It's not. And so the media immediately jumps on him because people cannot be allowed to realize that the president's telling the truth about that stuff. So they got to the corrupt Republicans in the Congress and got Steve King kicked off all the committees, and they said, well, this kind of horrible racism cannot be allowed to continue. We have to act against it. There wasn't any racism. It's just he was supporting the president, which is not allowed to happen. So what we're seeing is a concerted movement among all the colluding entities, which is all the major media channels, New York Times, Washington Post, thousands of other corrupt newspapers run by the same global rulers, and all taking their cues for what to say from the same central control point. And they were showing that anybody who goes against that and threatens their agenda must be destroyed, physically if necessary, but at least in reputation, and to block anything that they're trying to do. So this censorship is the first of the three things that we're talking about. The degree of collusion between these various organizations, entities, individuals, newspapers, media giants, and things that are arrayed against anyone that tries to actually wake up to what's really going on and drop the stupid party affiliation. And especially if you try to drop the labels like liberal and conservative and right and left and Democrat and Republican and just say, well, why do I need labels? Let's find out what's true. If a Democrat says something true, it's still true. And if a Republican says something that's true, it's true. If a 5-year-old says something true, it's just as true. So what's happened in the brainwashing is we've been hypnotized to get away from looking for what's true and think of who's saying it and who's right and who's wrong and who's bad and who's good, and focused on that, which is constant fighting. And it diverts you from your original interest, which is what's going on, what's true. So, all the formats of debates to show that how stupid the other guy is or the other woman, and that you're right and they're wrong, and all, this is a complete distraction. It's part of the divide and conquer mentality. And so Mike's warning is accurate. It's one of the big areas that, speaking of the U.S. president and Congress, they've really failed to address it. This is a big failing. And remember, I'm not coming out for the Republican or Democrat side or anything like that. I just want to know what's true, because we're so late in the game now, and we've been diverted onto this stupid fighting with each other that we haven't even seen. There's an extremely coordinated, integrated global ruling cartel that has been step by step destroying societies worldwide, and is right now largely focused on the U.S. and other Western civilization, because especially the U.S., which has, at least in the founding documents, maybe not in practice so much as it should be, but in the official basis of the country, it says it's for individual freedom. That government is only there like a servant of the people to protect their freedoms, and not a democracy, because in a democracy, especially with false information on the media, you can get the majority to vote for really stupid things and to do anything they want to the 49% or less minority, and they have no rights that are safe. Democracy is terrible. And a lot of times, and the rulers, the founders of America knew that. The rulers know it's terrible. That's why they are always pushing for it. And a lot of the corrupt people in government are saying, we have to protect our democracy. We don't have a democracy. In America, we're fortunate to have a constitutional republic, which then gets down to, well, is the Constitution any good? And the Constitution and Declaration of Independence in the U.S., which other countries are free to model anytime they want to, because it's saying that the same rights belong to everybody. That's not true in a democracy. If you get a majority to vote away your rights for the greater good, like they're doing all over the place in America right now, that's terrible. You don't want a democracy like that. You're not safe. But if the Constitution is written in a good way, recognizing that all your rights come from God when you're born or before, and they're in nature. They're just built in. The government can't vote to take them away. You can't have all the senators and congressmen or kings or presidents or prime ministers take away your rights, because they're inviolable. They're unalienable. And that's why you do not want a democracy in your country. To take a hint from the founders of America, which were not perfect, but in some ways they were really smart. And they knew that they did not want a democracy. It's not mentioned in the Constitution. The Republic is, and in the Declaration of Independence. So up to now, this censorship issue is a big area that the president and the Congress in the U.S. have failed on completely. And if you're in another country, you can judge how it is in your country, but it's probably the same. It's definitely going on all over the UK, all over what used to be Europe, and is now under the tyranny of the EU, which needs to be kicked out. Britain is trying to do that, at least kick it out of the UK. And it's being really difficult, because that's an unelected, tyrannical ruling body that intends to stay in place and already has aspects of an EU army that we saw running into France to intimidate the yellow vest protesters, right? Those giant heavy armor vehicles. Congress in the U.S., like a lot of the world, I guess, it acts like they're totally owned and controlled by Google and the other tech giants, not to mention the drug industry, the telecom industry, and all the others, a combination of blackmail and bribes, most likely. And when they held meetings recently with the president of Google there and other primary individuals in the companies that are censoring everybody's speech, they didn't even ask any good questions. It was like really an embarrassment for the country. Like a sharp group of grade school kids who had not had a lot of drugs or injections for, immunity that some states are making mandatory right now. If they hadn't been compromised by that stuff poisoning their blood, they would have been much smarter than any of those, well, most of the congressmen. There are a few that were good. But they just let, it was just totally for show. They didn't really do anything, and the president hasn't done anything visible anyway. And some of them, mostly all the Democrats, and if some of the corrupt Republicans say that there's no censorship problem, doesn't exist. And it's so huge of a problem, so obvious that, as I said, even an honest child would see it right away. It's just super obvious, and they're doing this psychological operation that some people call gaslighting, saying, no, there's no problem. It doesn't exist. Everything's normal. Just relax, go back to sleep, see if the soap opera or sports team that you want to see on TV is there, and don't worry about it. The experts are taking care of you. Everything's great. So why, if this president in the U.S. is not part of the traitors that are trying to destroy the country, along with the rest of the world, if he's not part of that, why is he not acting against the censorship, which is a critical threat to the survival of the country and the world? And almost a guarantee there will never be a fair election as long as that's going on. It wasn't last time. They just were not censoring quite enough, and there was a lot of machine hacking and stuff that went with it. That was the only way that he didn't get his true numbers, which were probably 4-1 in his favor, roughly, judging by the size of the rallies and all that. One excuse, partial excuse, is he's surrounded by traitors and people that he's had really bad judgment to hire that turned out to be his enemies and working against him to block anything at all that he's trying to do. But he could go to the American people and the people of the world directly in a weekly type, like fireside chat thing on TV and radio, that didn't even need any media representatives there. Of course, they're trying to say, well, maybe we shouldn't cover his addresses like they did with the State of the Union just a little while ago. Not the State of the Union, but the address that he wanted to make on border security. State of the Union still coming up, and they're arguing that, well, should they even let him be on television? And the media has become totally criminal in the U.S. and most of the world actually now. But he could take the media channels that would be willing to cover him, that were good, and just go direct to the people that way and explain everything. So if he's threatened, if he's got traitors working for him that are doing bad things, refusing to follow orders, which is common around him now, he could just go on the television and say, okay, these are the people that are obstructing everything. This is exactly what they're doing. I'll play you bits of a recording of what they say. Just expose the whole thing. When there's a threat to him, just show it, and don't cave into those things. One of the things that he should have done is declassifying and exposing all the documents that show all the crimes being done against him by the Democrats that made Watergate look like nothing. And those are all documented, and he has done nothing to expose it. Probably because his advisors and lawyers are saying, well, if you do that, it's going to really hurt the stock market. It's going to do all this bad stuff, and the country can't stand it. people couldn't really handle knowing what's actually going on, all this complete nonsense. And if he doesn't treat the public like grown-ups, then he loses a chance to turn everything around, which I think would be a big mistake. So, going along with the advice of corrupt lawyers and advisors is really not a very good excuse. He's been trusting of a lot of the wrong people, and as a result, it endangers the future existence of the country. And those are the same people that say, don't release the massive evidence of treason by the Democrats and corrupt Republicans. It would just be too hard for people to absorb, and that's nonsense. And he should realize that's nonsense. He's got brilliance in some areas and complete blind spots in others. Not releasing the evidence is a big mistake, and he's got to see through the false advisors. Those are the same ones, by the way, that told him that there was a chemical attack by Assad's people in Syria, which is not part of America. It's a sovereign country. And that he was, for some reason, trying to kill his own people with chemical weapons. It was a really stupid, false story. And the president made a massive mistake, which ended up being a war crime, in my opinion, shooting missiles from a ship into Syria. I don't think there were very many people killed. But you can't do stuff like that. It's not protecting American interests, it's protecting the arms dealers' interests, maybe, and the media's interest by making this big thing. That was one of the few times when the media actually supported him, because he was promoting war and shooting missiles into another country. The U.S. military had no business being in Syria at all. It was not invited. There was no declared war. Russian military was invited. They were allies of Syria, and they came in to kill ISIS, which is great. ISIS is a bunch of maniac terrorists trying to kill everybody for God, like their scriptures say they have to do. I've read them, I know. But they were actually following them, and it says take over the world for their religion. So they had to be killed, and Syria, with Russia's help, did that. The U.S. didn't need to be there. The other countries didn't need to be there that weren't invited. So he's been trusting of these people, and it threatens the existence of the whole country. So that should change, and if he doesn't move on the censorship quickly, Mike, I think, is right that America will fall into tyranny under Google and these huge tech giants working on the behest of other unseen levels of control. And I think that article was correct. So another big issue besides censorship, just as important and just as urgent, is this thing about the border wall. And the president, in this case, is actually saying the truth. Remember we talked about that fable called The Emperor's New Clothes certain times, and it's like everybody's under mass hypnosis thinking the emperor's wearing these beautiful clothes. You should read the fable if you haven't. It's pretty neat. And he's actually naked, and this one little kid who's not programmed, 3 years old or 5 years old, in the audience or something, screams out, "He's naked!" And then everybody shakes off the hypnosis and realizes, and in this case, the president has said, the country's naked, there's no southern border. It's just wide open. They've filmed columns of military men with weapons and carrying big backpacks, probably full of drugs, and like major operations into the country. And there's nothing being done about it. There's not enough border agents. There's not a physical barrier to deter anybody. And they're getting thousands of people just walking across it every month. And that's really absurd. And so the president is seeing clearly on that, and he says, you can't have a country if you don't have a border that you can defend. You don't have a country at that point. So if that's allowed to keep going, not just with America, but any country that has outside forces that would come in and damage it, needs to have a physical border they can defend. It's not just America. Mexico has a boundary a physical barrier on their southern border to defend against invaders from Central America. And they're illegal trespassers. It doesn't mean they're all bad people, but you can't have that open and maintain your country in a certain amount of time. It'll be destroyed. And if you have people coming in from a place that has qualities that you don't want, it has nothing to do with race. That's nonsense by the media. It has to do with trying to maintain the integrity of a country that you're building up from scratch into something hopefully good for the residents, including legal immigrants. This idea that he doesn't like legal immigrants is totally ridiculous. That anybody would fall for that does not speak well for our intelligence at all. So there's a border emergency on the southern border of America, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, 2,000 miles of border. And the opposition, which used to be in favor of border security, and they're on video saying that a few years ago, but now, because their major mission is to get rid of an outsider, which is the current president, they say, Pelosi, who's the leader of the Democratic House, says it's not a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. No, don't fall for that. It's not a wall. The wall is not a wall. It's an immorality. What's an immorality? A wall? It looks like a wall, but it's an immorality. That's really, it's not stupid. I don't think she actually believes that, because there was an interesting story during the week that Laura Loomer, a really great reporter, went to Nancy's house in California, which of course has 2 walls all around it to keep people out. And they brought some illegal aliens that they hired at a Home Depot, came over the wall into her front yard on this big, beautiful lawn near the grape vineyard. And they were going to set up a tent city because everybody should be welcome, and her wall is an immorality, right? But that didn't work. She was off vacationing, I think, in Hawaii while they had the government shut down. Not too concerned about it, apparently. And one of the people taking care of her place called the sheriffs, and they arrested the illegal aliens. So it's complete nonsense and hypocrisy. And a secure border is not an immorality. It's a country definition of the borders of a country. So again, though, there's this major, what appears to be a mistake on the part of the president again, even though he's right about the necessity of the wall. Obviously, I mean, everybody should know that. But he didn't need Congress for it. They're building bases and infrastructure and roads and all kinds of stuff in other countries where the U.S. isn't even allowed to be legally. And that money comes out of the military budget. That's all illegal, unconstitutional nonsense that's been going on for a long, long time. And the current president's actually trying to stop it, pulling troops out of Syria and Afghanistan. And the Democrats all hate him for that, too. They say he's endangering the world. But he's following through on the promise to be an anti-war president, which is incredible. Everybody should celebrate. But that's all illegal to have been in those countries at all, unless there was a declared war and an actual threat to the physical U.S. that they shouldn't be invading and occupying other countries. But he does have an absolute duty per the Constitution to defend the border against any possible invasion. And he's not doing it. He's talking about it, but he's not doing it yet. He could have taken military money and personnel the first day, as he's pulling them out of these other countries, put them on the border, nobody else gets through. That's the end of it. Not because he hates immigrants, obviously he's married to one, but because the illegal immigration would be the end of the country, and he's stopping that, which is great. So he should have built a wall by now, right from the beginning. First day in office, should have started moving military assets there and just built it. That was not an issue that required congressional approval at all, unless you want to put it in the budget, which there's no reason to do. So, and it would, besides, it would only be a small fraction of what's being spent illegally in the Middle East and presence in all those countries. Big oversight not to do that, but it could still be done. And today he made a speech from the White House a few hours ago before this broadcast, offering compromises and a special immigration deal to Democrats, but I don't think they're going to take it. I mean, hopefully I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong, but I think their mission is not to be sane, it's to destroy the president, and that's it. And anything they can do for that, they'll do. That's their main priority. He doesn't need their approval. He can just go do it. So I'm not sure what the strategy is there. Hopefully they'll accept the compromise, but I kind of doubt it, but we'll see. If not, more big, what they call caravans, that's invasion. Those are caravans like the military assault on Normandy in World War II was a caravan. It's not a caravan. They may not have tanks at this point, but they've got all kinds of people trained, organized, and funded by the UN, indirectly using taxpayer money from the U.S., which is kind of funny, to destroy the U.S. by bringing in ultimately millions of people, if they can get away with it, that will completely destroy the economic situation in America. Even legal immigrants who have good jobs, their jobs will be threatened. It's not a good thing. So he should just do his job, in my opinion, and just go ahead and build the wall. So I said there were 3 issues that we talk about today. And the other one that I thought of that was really important was brought to mind because there's a group that I think is a really good group called Organic Consumers Association. You guys might know of them. We had their chief political director and attorney, Alexis Baden-Meyer, on the Sunday guest show recently. Interesting interview, although it was cut short, but really great person, I think, along with Ronnie Cummins, who's been on the Sunday show as well. He's the international director of OCA. I have been supporting their work for a long time. But this morning I read that they are asking all those involved in the food issue, which is like trying to get organic farming all over the place, to feed people food that won't hurt them. Because eating poison food, in case you hadn't heard, is really not good for your body. And if it says, if you go in Whole Foods or some other supposed natural food store and you see it's called conventional, and they'll kind of distract you by, I'm talking about produce now, they'll say conventional and they'll have a sign on it you may have seen that says grown in Chile, like you're supposed to forget about whether it's poisoned and think, oh, it's just about where it's grown. Well, Chile is good, I'll buy it. It's really a psyop to make you forget about the fact that it's poisoned. Anytime you see conventional or that they don't mention that it's organic, read poisoned and see if it's worth saving, a few dollars to buy poison to feed your family. I don't think it's a very good idea personally. But that's what OCA was talking about, the food issue, to support not just organic but regenerative agriculture, which I totally agree with OCA on. That's really important. Where the soil gets richer every year, and the food that's grown on it is basically super health food. That should have been like obvious from the beginning. And the fact that this is one thing I agree with OCA about. I probably go farther than they do. I don't think GMOs should have been allowed on the planet anywhere, and the chemical fertilizers and pesticide, I feel like they should be phased out quickly. But the Green New Deal, because OCA is saying everybody involved in the food and health issue should support this Green New Deal. I completely disagree. I think the Green New Deal, as it is now, is terrible. It's a Trojan horse fraudulent movement to destroy America, and all these well-meaning people like OCA are saying, at last, they want to get rid of dirty energy technology and have healthy food, have everybody be healthy and prosperous and happy. And what could possibly be wrong with that? It's just evidence that we've all been dumbed down incredibly, and we latch onto something that's a whole package of stuff to think. Like if you think that you're progressive, suddenly all your issues about what to think are over. You've got a list. You're supposed to think, 1 through 100. That's your points of view. You don't even have to figure it out anymore. You're progressive. That's the end of it. And the same thing if you're any other thing, a Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative or, whatever. Here's your thoughts. This is your opinions. How much work does that save you? Boy, you don't even really have to think anymore. And besides that, you can think everybody who disagrees with you must be a complete idiot. It's called dumbing down, and we've been victims of it. And I don't think it's a very good idea for our future. In case you haven't noticed, we're a bunch of humans. Our real interests are the same. Air, water, clean food, place to live. If you want to live in a certain part of the world, you should be able to do that. And you should be able to have your own business or work for a business that you choose to make money. Freedom, basically, personal freedoms. And the Green New Deal as it is now is completely anti-freedom. It's against national sovereignty. I'll tell you why. But just because those stereotyped ways of thinking and organizing into groups that hate each other and just want to fight and debate to show how stupid the other side is, that doesn't speak well for our intelligence. It reminds me of the work of Dr. Stephen Greer that's often said we're what's called a level 0 society, I think. And our big question is, can we make it to level 1? Because level 0, that's the kind of planetary society that destroys life on its planet. It's not very intelligent. It's certainly not the only intelligent life in the universe. It's not even intelligent life on its own planet. And right now, as a whole planetary population, we're level 0. And it would be really nice to change that to level 1, where people actually work for their own benefit and each other's benefit, and they realize that those are the same thing. It does not mean collectivism, socialism, communism, things like are behind the Green New Deal. That is, essentially social suicide. And right now there's millions and millions of people, products of modern education and the media programming, that don't understand that, including, unfortunately, the leadership of OCA. But I think that could change. It's just the question of, are they brave enough to even look at the issue and not just say, we hate the other side and, we're progressives and we think everything that progressives think. You got to get above the 2-year-old mentality. It's not so important that we fight each other. It's more important that we work together to try to figure out common interests and how to achieve those without the loss of personal freedom. So, I guess the influence of the fake media, constant brainwashing, the advertising of the big corporations, including the drug corporations and other ones, big farming, which is not regenerative to say the least, fake entertainment, and really the programming that you have to just take on one of these labels, like, I guess in this case, being a progressive, and therefore, progressive, it kind of sounds like progress. It must be good. And there's just no deeper thinking. I wrote a long letter explaining the issues to OCA and got no response. So I feel like all we can do is talk about this publicly. And the entertainment industry is also heavily programmed, and most people don't even realize it. There's a lot of groups, therefore, supporting the Green New Deal that's basically national suicide for any country that follows it, not just America. And I'm not identified with any labels at all. If I have a label, it's the same as you or anybody else. We're all pure spirit. We're just wearing these beautiful, incredible costumes that are conscious, but it's not who we are. We're made out of the same thing, and we're not acting like it. So I've been essentially a strong environmentalist since at least the mid-1960s. Been involved in organic agriculture for more than 50 years, along with the health research that I've been doing. And I believe in absolute individual freedom, but not to do anything, because I don't think murder should be allowed, for example. Killing in self-defense is not murder, but murder, you know, malice aforethought, as the attorneys say, or any unjustified homicide at all, should not be allowed. But that's a restriction that doesn't infringe on your legitimate freedoms at all. And likewise, if you're going to make your own company and make a lot of money, I think that's great, but you can't do it in a way that's going to destroy other people or the world. This should not be what they call rocket science to understand. GMOs are proven, you know, just read the work of Jeffrey Smith or other really great authors, and there are many now, that have shown GMOs cause all kinds of diseases, and they make a mess of the whole ecosystem, not just humans. They infiltrate the whole biosphere, and only complete self-hating idiots or people that want to destroy the biosphere on purpose, and that's actually what's happening, intentionally, would ever allow those to be manufactured anywhere on the planet. And of course, we don't control, the US does not control what happens in other countries. They have to each make their own decision. They've got their own culture. Their own people have to decide what is good for them. But certainly in the country where you are, whatever country that is, or in my case, in the US, I think the ideal thing would be to have the GMO companies, the biotech companies that do that, shut down overnight, the executives arrested and tried for crimes against humanity. I don't see that as legitimate freedom at all. But it applies to a lot of other ones. I think that chemical toxic agriculture, aside from GMOs, should be phased out quickly. I completely agree with the value of that with the people who are behind the Green New Deal, but not the way they say to do it, for a number of reasons. But pesticides, chemical fertilizers, they were never necessary. It's like a lot of things in medicine. People can hardly imagine that, because we've been programmed for so many years to believe, well, of course they're necessary. I mean, decades ago we had the Green Revolution and other agricultural programs that pushed toxic agriculture on the rest of the world, and people suffered accordingly. And we've been taught that the chemicals are necessary to avoid planetary starvation. That is complete nonsense, and I'm not saying that because of a belief. I've been, as I said, involved intimately in agriculture for more than 50 years. And this whole toxic thing that you have to have chemicals and turn what used to be a beautiful profession, it was one of the healthiest on the planet, into one of the most dangerous, that was not brilliant. And it wasn't brilliant for the farmers to fall for it, but the people who taught the farmers that that was the way to go were doing it at the top levels out of pure malice, and they knew the results of it. It's the same companies involved in all these things. The collusion is way beyond what even the conspiracy theory people are aware of in most cases. And the current National Organic Program in the U.S. is a good step, but the USDA was always one of the biggest supporters of toxic agriculture on the planet. I don't trust them for a second. I mean, there's a lot of great people working in it, but at the top levels, they've ruined the country in a lot of ways, and had a bad influence overseas as well. So what needs to happen, and I agree with the New Deal on this, is non-toxic, environmentally friendly agriculture producing superfoods and healthy, even healthy things that you wear, like cotton and hemp now, thanks to the president decriminalizing that, which was great. The media should have been supporting that. All the liberal, progressive, whatever they want to call themselves, people should have been supporting the decriminalization of hemp. That was a great achievement. And other fibers, they all need to be clean, not GMO. So I believe in that stuff. But the Green New Deal is advocating massive government borrowing to fund this huge change and retrofit all the buildings to make them more energy efficient. Do you know how much money that takes to do all the buildings in America and retrofit them all up to energy efficiency standards? What it is you borrow all the money, and you borrow it largely from the criminal organization in the U.S. known as the Federal Reserve, analogous to the central bank. If you're not in the U.S., your country is almost certainly controlled by a central bank there, which is like this giant leech, sucking the prosperity off of the people that are creating and earning it. And it's a terrible thing, and that cartel, all under the jurisdiction of the BIS in Switzerland, should be shut down, and the officers of that should be indicted for horrible crimes against humanity, including treason and everything else. They made believe they were going to come and stabilize the economy in America. In 1913, they got approved by a either really dumb or complicit Congress, and they've been in charge ever since, creating disasters and depressions and recessions and boom and bust cycles and everything they said that they were there to prevent. Kind of like a drug that you take that says it prevents a certain disease and it actually causes it. That's a way of describing the Federal Reserve. And whatever central bank is in your country, that's the real government. And it controls what the supposed government actually does. Total disaster to have massive borrowing from the Fed, not intelligent Green New Deal people. It's a really, really bad idea. And you need to get away from that as fast as you can. And see, most of the Green New people and the Green New Deal people and the ones calling themselves progressives, they don't want to think at that depth. They say, Green New Deal, it's all progressive, it's all good. They just get mad. They won't look at it. I don't know how that happened. I think these are the same people as are out in the street screaming and hating the president and say no wall, no border, no wall, no USA at all. They think that's going to make utopia. And they're becoming the pawns of the socialist communist approach, which is always a disaster. And there was a tweet by the son of the president in response to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying that she was saying, well, why are you so afraid of a socialist economy? And he put out on Twitter that, well, because Americans like to walk their dogs, and the people in those economies that you just mentioned, they eat them instead, like Venezuela, when their country falls apart. And that's exactly where these people are going, because they don't want to think. They just want to say, this is the right way, and we're just going to scream in response to your request for a discussion. Also, they're talking about things like, and I got to be fast now, we're almost out of time, ongoing intentional climate disruption. They're saying the way to do that is have this massive, they call it investment, right? That's code for massive taxation and borrowing. And there's no mention, if they're so worried about climate change, and climate's always changing, but there is a disruption of the climate going on right now, and it's a threat to all life on the planet. It's serious. But the main cause of it is this gigantic fleet of aircraft, which anybody can see who's not totally brainwashed, spraying toxic metals and bioweapons right on the heads of their own citizens. Like in America, it's happening almost every day. Toxic aluminum, barium, strontium, bioweapons, cross-domain bacteria, all kinds of other junk in there. That's actually altering the weather. If you want to look at that in detail and documentation and in-depth explanation, pictures of the nozzles retrofitted on the aircraft, you can see all that evidence at geoengineeringwatch.org and globalskywatch.com, two really good sites. They might talk mostly about the weather, but it's actually a very broad spectrum campaign that poisons the whole biosphere, and it's not by mistake. That must be discussed by anybody who's sincere about caring about the climate. That's item number one. Now, why is it that the Green New Deal is oblivious, makes believe it's oblivious to that? Or if they're not oblivious to that, why are they hiding it? So you can't just screaming, when this is called out. You have to learn to try to have a coherent discussion and really look at these things. You can't just scream conspiracy theory until you know that it's really not true, and this one is true. And it's very important. It's poisoning the air, water, soil, agriculture of the whole planet. True regenerative agriculture is being assaulted by geoengineering, and these Green New Deal people are not talking about it. That could be shut down overnight with zero cost just by using the U.S. Air Force. This is another failing of the president and Congress, but probably because they're not even conscious of it, just like a lot of the environmental people are not. They need to use the Air Force to escort those planes out of the sky. I don't mean to hurt them, just make them land. They have fighter planes that can do that. They can fly as high as the geoengineering planes. Bring them down, arrest the pilots, find out who the bosses are, arrest them, and by tomorrow, we'd start having a better climate. Tomorrow. No cost, no borrowing, no taxation. In fact, massive money saving, because who do you think is paying for hundreds of airplanes to fly around the clock, spraying poison all over the people? It's not nonsense, it's true. You know, we've had aircraft experts, Russ Tanner and others on the show, that explain the modern jet engines don't have the white trails behind them. Oh, wait a minute. The National Weather Service says that's ice crystals. They also have gag orders against saying what's really happening. Those are solid particles, and they've been collected, analyzed. There's no more question except what some of the unknown elements in there might be. That has to be stopped. Nobody really cares about climate change if they don't want to stop geoengineering first. So I think that's a really important issue with the Green New Deal people. Another thing in the Green New Deal is they advocate total government-controlled healthcare in quotes, I would say. That's not intelligent, you guys. That means the government decides what healthcare is. Every injection of toxins that they think the CDC and the injection companies together want you to have, you will have, or you won't get any healthcare at all. Or if it's all coordinated with your universal basic income, also a terrible idea, because whoever gives you that money that you depend on can tell you what to do in your life, and they will. And anybody that doesn't agree to that, it's fine. You have freedom to disagree. You just don't get any more food. So total government control over everything is completely insane. Income and jobs for all. Who's going to pay for that? More borrowing, more control by the Fed. You don't even need that. If you shut down the Fed and stop the theft by the central banks and get rid of toxic deals with the poison companies and the government, whether it's telecom or commercial fertilizer or pesticides or nuclear power or anything like that, stop all those deals. Those are not free market deals. Those are collusion, corporatism. Stop that, prosperity comes back, private charity blooms everywhere. Things will be really, really different, very fast, no cost, massive money saving. The way the Green New Deal right now is completely ridiculous. The only excuse is lack of intelligence, but the people at the top, they can't use that excuse. They know what it'll do. And it creates devastation for everybody except the top level rulers, and they become the super elite. So it's suicidal, but it could be changed. It could be fixed. I'm just about out of time now, but I wanted to mention those three issues, but there are solutions to all of it. Those deals could be fixed. Remember what I said in the beginning. The reason any of that stuff comes up is lack of consciousness. That's a real emergency. And anybody who's listening to this, any part of the world, you can be part of a solution. Do it on your own or do it with us. We're doing it on a private platform, working on how those can all be reversed. It's called planetaryhealingclub.com. You're welcome to come there and check it out. I'm there live every week. It's interactive. It's stuff that we can't talk about freely on the censored platforms, but it's going on, and you're invited to join us if you're one of the people that's brave enough to start getting into the real stuff. Otherwise, lostartsradio.com is our main site. Our Sunday show, which is tomorrow, has incredible guests on it. That's free to everybody, and it'd be nice to see you there. That's coming up in about 24 hours or less. And otherwise, thanks for spending the time with us. I really appreciate it. This is not to be pessimistic at all, and I'm not. We have massive power to change things. But the secret is it's all internal. And by resonance, which is what Tesla talked about, you can change any scope of problem that you want, but it takes some work. So anyway, If you want to get into that, planetaryhealingclub.com. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next week. And have a good rest of your weekend. We'll see you soon.